Before we start the Surah Layl, uh, some of you have, of course, some of you have heard the khutbah I gave yesterday, and because of the interest of various people about the Muslim ban, I want us to say a few words about the Muslim ban. Because the article that I was commenting about was either reckless or woefully ignorant about various things that surround the Muslim ban. So in response to various people that have wrote me and said, well, what is the deal with the Muslim ban? Because what they are hearing from, unfortunately, folks in Zaytuna and is a whitewash. People will tell them, well, no, the Muslim ban is not really a Muslim ban. It's not really anything that we Muslims should be upset about. It's okay. That's as a lawyer, as a law professor, it is unconscionable. Okay, the article and other lectures that I've heard from the Zaytuna folks, and I can't believe it. I don't know what is wrong with these people. Is that the Muslim ban is not a Muslim ban, A, and B, that it doesn't involve civil rights and it doesn't involve human rights because the U.S. is a sovereign country. And as a sovereign country, it has the right to accept or not accept immigrants as it sees fit. And as such, we as U.S. citizens should not be upset about the U.S.'s immigration policies because the U.S. as a sovereign country has a right to adopt whatever immigration policies and laws it desires. And we as U.S. citizens should be fine with that. Because, again, why shouldn't the U.S. have the right to say we don't want people from Yemen, or we don't want people from Somalia, or we don't want people from Iran, or we don't want people from Syria, or we don't want people from Venezuela, or we don't want people from North Korea. Okay, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but again, because there's a lot of confusion by kids about the Muslim ban. First, the United States is a signatory to an international treaty called the Refugee Convention. As a signatory, this is the treaty that we signed and ratified. As a signatory to this international treaty, we are obligated as a country not to close the doors to political asylees who qualify under the terms of the Refugee Convention to apply for asylum in the U.S. So if they fulfill the terms of the convention, we, the United States, are obligated under international law to not exclude all refugees. So that's one. Furthermore, under international law, under the United Nations Charter, under various human rights treaties like the Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, under the Refugee Convention itself, we, the United States, are obligated not to discriminate against refugees on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. So in other words, you have the right to say, I'm going to limit the number of refugees I take. But you don't have the right to say, under international law, I'm not going to take any refugees. Or to say, I'm going to take refugees, but I'm going to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, or ethnicity, or national origin. This is not just international law, by the way, but there's also an American statute. There's an American law, a provision of the INA that says the American government is not allowed to discriminate on the basis of religion, race, or ethnicity in its immigration policies. There is a provision of the INA that had not been used for ages and that Trump's lawyers discovered and relied on, that says in the case of national emergency, in the case of exceptional circumstance, the president may issue an executive order that basically suspends immigration laws passed by Congress as long as these exigencies, as long as these special circumstances continue. Now, legally, even if the president relies on this provision, the president cannot violate either international law or constitutional law by discriminating on the basis of race, religion, or ethnicity. So you can't say, we will only admit whites, or we will only admit Christians, or we will only admit whatever. Why do we have these laws? Why did Congress pass this law? Congress passed this law because for many years our immigration laws were race-based. We only admitted whites, we discriminated against blacks, and discriminated against Asians. And we also, for most of our American history, until 1965, we also discriminated against Muslims. Until 1965, Muslims were considered, we couldn't decide whether Muslims were whites or non-whites. When Muslims were considered whites, we would let them in. When Muslims were not considered whites, we would not let them in. And there's a lot of cases. Interestingly, it was in 1965, a petitioner, a Saudi Arabian, who petitioned the court, said, I'm a Muslim, but as a Muslim I am white. And there was a court that agreed, and so and that's why technically we still consider Middle Easterners whites, if you wonder the genesis of the law. Anyway, but eventually there was a civil rights movement and a human rights movement, and Congress realized that discriminating on the basis of religion, race, ethnicity is unconstitutional. Now, importantly, people, the executive order that became known as a Muslim ban had several reiterations. Initially, Trump, during his election campaign, promised not to admit Muslims to the country, period, to exclude all Muslims. And when he was elected president, he brought in his advisors, Islamophobes like Michael Flynn and Bannon and others, and they started thinking about, okay, so how can we ban Muslims from coming to the country? He was told, and all of this is documented, he was told, you cannot do that constitutionally. So instead of saying we're banning Muslims, can we name Muslim countries and ban Muslims this way? So instead of saying we don't want Muslims, instead we say we don't want Egyptians, we don't want Syrians, we don't want Yemenis. In other words, we name all the countries that Muslims come from. Initially, he was told, yes, but if you name all the Muslim countries, that will create political problems with certain allies like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, countries that we like and we need. So he said, well, okay, so how about naming a bunch of Muslim countries and not including in the list countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, countries that we consider to be allies, but effectively lowering the number of immigration by Muslims to the United States by naming as many Muslim countries as we can. Now there is a problem. How about Christians that live in Muslim countries? So they said, okay, well, why don't we create an exception? So we ban people from Egypt, for instance, but we create an exception that if you are a minority in a Muslim country, i.e. Christian, you can still come. So the first executive order, that's how it was drafted. And it became very clear that that's unconstitutional. Because everyone saw through it. Everyone, clearly, you're trying to just simply lower the number of Muslims that come to this country, and you're creating an exception for Christians. After a bunch of constitutional challenges, in which people like me were involved, and people from Zaytuna were not involved, because if you go the Zaytuna route, you sit there as you get smacked on your face, and you say it's a Christian thing. You give them your other side, it's very Christian. If they strike you on one side of your face, give them the other side. SubhanAllah, Zaytuna is as Christian as you get. So if it was these people, they weren't there. None of the legal work which was done was they involved. They were just saying bravo to Trump. That's all they do. That's why this article is outrageous. Because it was thanks to people like myself that the first executive order was struck down. Not to the Zaytuna folks. So Trump went back to the drawing board. Okay, let's try the number 2 executive order. Remember, this is not the first executive order. Number 2 executive orders. Let's take the Christian exception out and let's lower the number of Muslim countries. So remove some Muslim countries. And of course, someone said, well, why don't we add a couple of non-Muslim countries to make it look like it's not anti-Islamic? It's not genius lawyering. It's not brilliance. Which countries do you add? The countries in which we, the State Department, doesn't give any visas to. North Korea and Venezuela. We had not given any visas to Venezuelans or North Koreans unless they were political dissidents, and that's not even 100 visas a year. So you're adding countries in which there's no immigration from anyway. That second executive order was still unconstitutional because of the language was anti-Islamic. The third executive order was cleansed of its anti-Islamic language, and a few countries like Iraq were removed, and you kept countries like Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and so on. Even then, because the legislative history of that executive order, in other words, the history of the administrative act, it's not really, I'm just calling it legislative to explain the process. But because of the rhetoric that went on behind that legislative order, the executive order, the third one, everyone still thought it was unconstitutional. And every court in which it was challenged struck it down as unconstitutional. Why unconstitutional? Because it was the language used to justify the issuing of that third executive order was rabidly anti-Islamic. It was explicitly, we want to lessen the number of Muslims coming to this country. The Supreme Court, because of the politics of the Supreme Court, surprised all the circuits. by reversing all the circuits that struck down the executive order as unconstitutional, and in a very narrow decision decided that it is constitutional. In a decision 5-4, four hardline conservative judges and four not even liberal. You can't count, there's no liberals on the Supreme Court. They're just moderates. And a swing vote, a vote that could have gone either this way or that way. Importantly, that vote that decided that it is constitutional relied on what? On the fact that the opinion of the Supreme Court makes it very clear. They say we don't agree with Trump's anti-Muslim animus. They concede that Trump, in his election campaign and in the history of the executive order, is Islamophobic. They call it an anti-Muslim animus. You see, we don't challenge that. But that, according to the majority opinion, but that is not our issue. Our issue is that it is facially neutral, meaning the language itself of the official third executive order doesn't say anything about Islam. It just names certain Muslim countries. For the swing vote, for the guy who voted to make it 5-4, he said, it makes all the difference to me that there is a provision in the executive order for exceptions that allow us to look on a case-by-case basis for humanitarian exceptions. And if it hadn't been for the exception provisions, I would agree it's unconstitutional. So in other words, that all Syrians, you cannot come to the U.S., but we are going to look at case-by-case basis to decide whether you should get an exception or not. For the swing vote, that saved the neutrality of the executive order. Does everyone follow me? The problem is this. Since the Supreme Court upheld the executive order, the executive branch has not granted the exceptions. So it's just formality on paper. Which means that all the families that have been separated, who are from Iran, or from Yemen, or from Syria, or from Somalia, you're out of luck. So a lot of people who were married, wanted to bring their wife from Iran, wanted to bring their wife from Yemen, wanted to, parents and children wanted to reunite, with siblings, etc., etc. All of them were out of luck. And the exceptions are not granted. Now, for us to pretend that this is not a Muslim ban, what are we doing? Who will protect your rights if you as Muslims don't protect your own rights? Yani, when I work on this issue, I work with Jews and Christians, mostly. Jews and Christians. Jews and Christians know that this is a Muslim ban. I swear by Allah, Wallahi al-Azim, all the people that are working to protect the civil rights of Muslims in the United States, all of them that I work with are Jews and Christians. I haven't seen a Muslim face around. And I am ashamed. I didn't even want to, I didn't want to, if I showed one of the lawyers that I work with that article, wallahi, I wouldn't have the face, I wouldn't be able to show my face. Because they're working very hard to say we don't want to live in a country that discriminates against Muslims, and then they find a representative of the only Muslim academic institution in this country saying, no, it's okay to discriminate against us. We like being smacked on the head. It's okay to degrade us. We're Muslims. We love it. What do you say? You mean, there were numerous demonstrations before and after the Supreme Court decisions where we worked primarily with non-Muslims. All the activists, all the organizers, all the people who prepared the amicus briefs, all the people who are monitoring the way that the government is implementing this law. The government, this government, is violating the Constitution by violating the provisions of separation of church and state by clearly preferring Christianity in its immigration policies. Who's challenging that? Who's saying you cannot give preference to Christianity? You have to treat Islam and Christianity equally. Not the Zaytuna folks, me, and people like me. And the people like me are not Christian and are not Muslim. They're Christian and Jews. So shut up. If you're ignorant and an idiot, and I mean it, people get offended that I call people idiots. No, they're idiots. They're idiots. Because if they're not idiots, they're worse. So I'm kind to them by saying, you're idiots. You're not worse. Hopefully. We're working very hard to preserve the civil rights of Muslims in this country. And it's not Muslims that I work with. Then you have these, I don't know what do you call them. What do you call them? You cannot lower. I don't care if you as a Muslim don't care about your own rights and you love to be degraded, that's your business. You know, if you're into masochism, go for it. You know, hire someone to whip you and flog you and have all the fun you want. But the country I live in, I want to live in a country that protects civil rights. A country that separates religion from the state. A country that doesn't give preference to one religion over another, whether that religion is Islam or Christianity. And the country that I want to live in is when I see the government abusing its power by giving preference to one religion over another in immigration issues, is a country where I can hold the government accountable. You want to live in a medieval kingdom where the king is your god? Go immigrate to Saudi or the Emirates, worship the king as you like. We here are a country of rights and laws and the rule of law. You love Mauritania so much and the Emirates so much and Saudi so much, go live there. Go worship your king. Make him your ilah. Here we are a country of laws. And that is what I live by. And I live by that from the basis of my Islamic ethics. Because this is what Islam raises me to fully embrace rights and justice. Rights and justice, we don't worship kings. We don't say, oh, whatever you want, your majesty. We don't do that. I can forgive a professor in Egypt who can't say a word because he's afraid he'll be tortured. I can forgive a professor in Saudi. I can forgive a professor in the United Arab Emirates. But I cannot forgive a professor in the United States. Because there's no cost. You're worshiping the government for nothing. So that they just can give you a little bit of extra money, so that they can invite you to the White House breakfast, so that you can get a little bit of praise. If you want to worship your king, this is the country of rule of law. This is the country of rights. Don't tell me the Muslim ban doesn't involve civil rights or human rights and pretend to represent what the United States stands for. Okay. Okay, let's take it. I mean, you know, lawyers think in terms of billables. When I think of how many hours, what could have been billable hours, have spent defending the rights of Muslims, and then you see Muslims acting like losers, like that, you're full of rage. I mean, I can't calculate the number of hours. If you would have done commercial cases or international arbitrations, you would have been compensated for your hours handsomely. But instead you decide I will work with non-Muslims out of principle. It is outrageous. It is beyond comprehension or belief or understanding. Yeah.
What I see about the conferences about the National Association for Muslim Lawyers, like, where are they contributing?
Muslim lawyers are mostly out to make good salaries and buy fancy cars and fancy homes, and the proof is in the pudding. Okay, how many people are doing pro bono work in these civil rights cases? For all the Muslim lawyers that sit there and pontificate on social media, when it comes to where the rubber meets the road, they're not there. So my response to all the pontifications is shut up. You either show up where it matters, you contribute actual energy and effort and time, you do the hard work that you do when you serve your clients, when you're billing. You do the research, you write the memos, you do the filings, or either that or just shut up. Because all your pontifications about Islam I can do without. Let's take 5 minutes. I can't deal with the Quran when I'm so heated.